see how this is working. Okay. If I'm gonna before we formally start, I just want to make sure that people, again, the big thing is, do you guys see everything correctly? Do you hear us? Are there any problems? Please speak in the live chat if you, whatever the deal is. It's working, not working, whatever. Before I formally start, I'm gonna wait for that to happen. We do have 3 people in. I hope it is working. If it's not, please again tell me if you can. Gonna wait for that to happen. A little bit of an awkward silence here at the very beginning. The fact that there aren't many people watching and it's back down to 0 views makes me feel like something isn't working. Let me see if I can figure out what the problem could be.
You want me to try to see if I can pull it up on my phone real quick?
Yeah, that might not be a bad thing. To the one person who is watching right this second, any clarification would be great.
It doesn't say you're live for me.
I wonder if that's lag or if that's...
Oh, here we go.
Okay.
Like it says I'm just sitting down.
Okay, so it's probably mostly lag.
It doesn't say you're live. Yeah, see, it's working.
Okay, it is working? Okay, so I apologize for everyone for the long... Wait. Is it working? Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I apologize to everyone for the long pause. You probably can tell at this point already that we are a little bit of a different technological setup today, and I'll explain that in a minute. But first, hello, ladies and gentlemen, Vanderbilt and the entire YouTube world, and welcome to Terrier Talk Season 2, Episode 32. I am here this time online with a friend of mine, Brennan Hamner. Hello. And here to talk about a few things, but first, obviously, with all of the COVID-19 issues, it's not exactly safe anymore to have, close, all the social distancing. We solved that in a different way last week with Bella, but here we're just going to do a video call, so that's why we had the long pause at the beginning of the episode to make sure that it is indeed working, and it seems to be. So, with that being said, again, welcome onto the show, Brennan Hamner, major key player for the baseball team this season. That's what we're here to talk about. So, Brennan, first big question. Obviously, we'll talk about the problems that this has caused you guys, all the big virus. But first, the beginning of the season looked very promising. Had a great series with A.D. White and then some tournaments. So how exactly did those games go at the beginning of the season? Why did you guys succeed? How were those games?
Yeah, we didn't really think that we were going to be like as good as we started off to be. But whenever we started playing games, we were hitting well, we were pitching well. Like all our pitching was on key. We had a really young kid, Owen Scheck-Snyder. He pitched really good, and he started off doing well throughout the year. And he would have been a good key to us. Also, Zach Ruggiero. He started off good, and during games we would just pitch good throughout the game, and then we would get key hits in the middle of the game. Also, Evan Frank, he was our starting pitcher too.
And are you the number 2 pitcher, or where?
It's I started off, and then to Evan, and then to Owen Scheck-Snyder.
Okay, well, awesome. That rotation has been was very strong at the beginning of the season for sure. Yeah. And I remember I was able to make one of your guys' games. It was a very fun watch when you played De La Salle. and you had a very successful tournament there when you hosted it. Ended up.
The show's not showing up on your stream.
It might be lagging a bit. I know people are able to get in.
Oh, people are watching?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think, I know Lee is able to, was able to comment at some point, so I don't know if there was some sort of lag or if there is some sort of lag. I hope that is not an issue right now. But either way, so as I was saying, there was, you guys had a lot of success and you hosted your own tournament. And at the tournament, you went 2-1, had a lot of success in those 2 games. And the team as a whole just seemed very successful from top to bottom, top of the batting order to the bottom of the batting order. The pitching, the defense was all solid. And I don't think there's really much more to ask for a team from that. There really wasn't a hole. And from what I saw, the bats were powerful. And you guys had a lot of success. Now, to begin the season, one of the more interesting series I've seen from the beginning of a baseball season. You began the season with E.D. White, of course, a big rematch from the end of the season series last season to decide district, and of course they were undefeated going into it. Great series there. And it didn't get off to the best start, if I recall correctly. Had a very interesting game.
We lost.
Right, but it's less the loss itself and more the way you lost that I found interesting. You were up. Do you want to tell that or?
Yeah, we were up 1-0 for a few times for like 2-3 innings, and Owen Schecksnyder, he went the full game. He was pitching well, and then like at the 6th inning, all of a sudden they get hit. We walk one, and then they get another hit, and then they score one guy, and then they end up scoring another.
Right.
And yeah,
weren't both of the runs off of like passed balls, if I recall?
Yeah. Yes. They were, but they also got a no. One run was off of a hit to left field.
Okay, but still, a deciding run being scored off of a passed ball is odd. But that's as sad as that loss was, as unfortunate as it was. You guys definitely bounced back, and of course, the big holy war that series, winning the next 2 games. One of which being a big, if I recall correctly, a 1-hit complete game. Or a 2-hit complete game from Evan Frank?
Yes, the 3rd game Evan got I think it was a 1-hit. Yeah, and it was a complete game and we won that one. I forgot the score, but
either way, that's that's an incredibly impressive performance, not just from him, and of course it was an impressive performance from him, but from the entire team. The defense, in order to get the putouts and the ground outs or whatever, in order to only give up 1 hit throughout an entire game is incredibly impressive, not just at this level, but at any level. So congratulations to you guys for that incredible performance. And of course, as well as beating E.D. White in a 3-game series. That's a great game.
We beat him twice. I think the second game was 2-0, 2-1. I don't remember. Because I pitched a full game that game.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it was Owen pitched almost a full game. Like I think he went 6 innings, and then the 7th inning got pulled out. And then I pitched a full game, and then Evan pitched a full game. We had like great pitching that series. Yeah,
and from what I've seen of you guys in general, the defense has been absolutely stellar. If we had a full season and were able to keep track of ERAs, it probably would be maybe a regional best. I don't know. If I had to guess.
Yeah, we're pretty good.
Yeah, you guys have been great, and I think it's really unfortunate what this season took away from you. And that leads me to the next point. Of course, all the complications with this virus have led to cancelings of all of the LHSAA events, from regular season track, baseball, softball, bowling, golf. Everything is just over. We don't have school, of course, right now either. So with that being said, there is still no confirmation of any cancellation past April 13th, which means you would have a chance to do postseason play, potentially. First off, are there any updates from baseball on that front?
No. I know. He told us about we don't know until April 7th.
Okay.
So are talking, and then April 13th is when they make the final decision.
Okay. Well, we're going to go ahead and talk about this as if you do end up playing postseason baseball. Hopefully you can. Obviously, this has been a very successful season so far. You guys have looked great, and it would really be a shame if this season, ended up kind of disappearing from that. It seemed very promising. Mm-hmm. But with that being said, if you do have that chance to go out and play postseason baseball, how far do you think you can go if that ends up happening? I know you guys have had tons of success. How in what is usually a very competitive division, how do you think you guys could do if that situation ends up happening?
Yeah, being in the hardest division for high school baseball,
mm-hmm.
it's kind of hard to say. I think we would do really well. I mean, but we're gonna have to put up some good fights,
right?
Because there are good teams in our division.
I remember last season, especially the top of the division, the top, say, 10 teams or so, amazing. I remember last season, Edie White was 27-0, of course, going into the final game of the regular season against you guys, where you ended up winning. But they were the 7 seed, I think, going into even that game when they were undefeated. Or
it's because they played a lot of low-scored teams.
Right, I mean, they didn't have many power points because of their relative lack of strength of schedule. But they were still undefeated, and seeing that team as theoretically only the 7th best team or 8th best team or whatever they ended up being ranked, I think they were 8th anyway. No, De La Salle was 8th last season, I think. You were 9th, and then they were either 7th or 10th.
No, they were ahead of us.
They were ahead of, okay. But it must have still been 7th. Either way. Because I guess a loss to when you guys had 20 wins wasn't exactly going to hurt them too much. Either way. That sort of team, that caliber of team, and they were a very good team. You ended up splitting the series, of course, with them. They were only a 7 seed. Seeing that was eye-opening to me, just for the strength of that division. It is truly one of, if not absolutely, as you said, the best division in Louisiana baseball. There is no level of competition like that, but I think if there is a chance for it to happen, I think you guys can put up a fight with anyone and everyone within there. Would have a chance to go make a run at one of the most impressive state championship divisions out there. So if that does happen, I of course wish you guys the best of luck, and I hope you can, really more than anything else, more than any success you do have in a hypothetical finish season, I hope you can finish the season more than anything else. So I hope that happens, and I hope if it does happen, you have great success. So I wish you the best of luck, and I will see you later. You're welcome. So
there we go. Peace. Leave me.
Okay, so now one thing I forgot to say. First off, thank you again to Brennan for coming on the show. I know we had a few technical difficulties, excuse me, and we might still be having them. I'm a little bit iffy on that. It seems that we have people watching, so I don't think it's a problem. But if it is, of course, I apologize. Not just to you guys, of course, to you as well, but also to Brennan for any difficulties that might have happened. But either way, even if there aren't any difficulties, there is more lag in this stream than there would be normally because there are extra hoops that we have to jump through. So, with that being said, if you have any questions, comments, whatever you want to say, obviously feel free to interact. I love interaction during any of these live streams. If you do have any of that, feel free to do it. Just keep in mind that it's going to be lagging more than normal within these episodes. So, there is no Vanderbilt athletic, anything, there are no Terrier athletics to talk about, of course. So, just like last week, I'm going to transfer over to college and NFL football, which is the plan with this channel going into the future. So this week, what I've decided to do is I've decided to evaluate every single LSU prospect for the draft. Every single one of the 16 guys that were given an invite to the NFL Combine are going to be discussed here, where I think they will go, roughly, where I think they fit in, not just in their position group, but in the draft overall, their Combine performance, as well as what teams I think fit best with them, depending on the talent, depending on the person. I decided to just talk about LSU because I know a lot of the people watching still are specifically big LSU fans, so I think it'd be interesting to look at what teams I think are potential destinations for all of the great players from this past successful season. Now, before I go into it, in a lot of detail, there is an interesting statistic I found from looking at this. And it's the fact that the number I mentioned earlier, 16 different players that are going into the Combine, or that were invited to the Combine and will potentially be drafted, that is the highest number of any school this year. I mean, you think of those really top-tier programs, your Alabamas, your Ohio States, your Clemsons, your Oklahomas, your Georgias, all these teams that you, in previous years, would usually take that record, take that title. No, it's us. And it makes sense, of course. We won the championship last year, so having the most players that are NFL ready on our team makes a lot of sense. But it's still an incredibly impressive number, an incredibly impressive statistic. So, not only congratulations, I mean, obviously it is great, but just something interesting I found about this class. So I'm going to go, not in any specific order, but starting with the big one, of course, our starting quarterback from last season, Joe Burrow. And he's not just our starting quarterback, not just our number one draft prospect. He is the number one prospect in the entire class, other than maybe Chase Young. Chase Young, maybe people say, is the better player, but Joe Burrow, pretty consensus so far, people are saying is going to go first overall. That's the expectation, that's the projection, and that's where I think he should go. While Chase Young may be the better player overall, he's a generational defensive line talent. The number one team this season is the Cincinnati Bengals. And their quarterback right now is Andy Dalton, and he has not had the success that you would want for your quarterback of the future. And Joe Burrow is really a complete prospect when it comes to any quarterback prospect in this draft. Tua Tagovailoa is a little bit too injury prone. We have problems with Justin Herbert and Jordan Love and Jake Fromm and Jalen Hurts and all these other names. Joe Burrow is that complete quarterback prospect, and at first overall, there is no other pick for the Cincinnati Bengals. They seem to be doing what they can right now to already be building around him, assuming that Joe Burrow is that spot in the draft. That's the big thing that I've seen from that really leads me towards thinking that is their decision with AJ Green in free agency. I didn't mention it last week when I talked about the free agent moves, but they decided to franchise tag AJ Green. And with that, that's the sort of thing that makes me think that their plan with AJ Green is, or at least a part of their intention, is keep him around for one more year. Hopefully he's not injured. And this time he has a very talented young quarterback to throw to in Joe Burrow, of course. And hopefully to them, that'll appetize him enough for him to stay in Cincinnati and potentially have some success there. Now my guess is, as much success as Joe Burrow had this past season, Heisman Trophy, all the different awards, the national championship, going undefeated, and they were great, and it was amazing to watch, and it was so much fun. I don't think he's going to have that same success in year one with Cincinnati, assuming he goes there. Just because that's not how rookie quarterbacks tend to work. Rookie seasons in the NFL aren't usually that successful. We've seen some variations on that in recent history. Just this past year, Kyler Murray won some games, but he didn't make the playoffs, of course. They still have, I think, the 8th overall pick. But the year before, you saw Lamar Jackson, of course, make the playoffs, but of course, the team, there were a few exceptions with that. First off, he was a 32nd overall pick, not a top overall pick. And secondly, he only came in about halfway through the season. And of course, you saw Baker Mayfield, the true, example of what a first overall quarterback should be doing in his rookie year. He only got 7 wins. He didn't have a winning record. So I think the Baker Mayfield rookie season is about best case scenario for Joe Burrow, just looking at Cincinnati's roster. However, when it comes to a career trajectory, the sky is the absolute limit for Joe Burrow, and I hope he has as much success as he possibly can. One final note with this Joe Burrow pick is the fact that there are a lot of potential fireworks with that first overall pick. Joe Burrow's college football season was so great not just numerically, but just watching how he played, that there are teams that are looking to trade up and giving a lot of value to Cincinnati for that first overall pick, specifically the Chargers and the Dolphins, the two other big top 10 pick teams that are super quarterback needy as well. Tyrod Taylor and Ryan Fitzpatrick don't exactly exude confidence in that position. They're likely to take Tua Tagovailoa and Justin Herbert, but they might be willing to prefer Joe Burrow. The Panthers were also in that talk for a long time, but of course with the Teddy Bridgewater deal, that is no longer a real possibility this season. So next we have Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the big, in the words of Ed Orgeron, 6'4", 270 or 6'7", 270. In his mind, it was 6'7", 400 pounds. Excuse me. That was the size of his heart, and in that great Alabama game, just the entire season. And love the guy, and I think he'll have a lot of success in the NFL, but his stock is obviously not just not near Joe Burrow's, but also not very high in general, in spite of a great combine performance. And I think that's a theme for the majority of the LSU players. The players that competed in the combine were great and completely surpassed any expectations they had. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is no exception to that. He just popped off the screen within that combine. In spite of that, because of his position, mainly, his stock is not high at all. The running back core this season, as it seems like it is with every year, is absolutely stacked this class. DeAndre Swift, Jonathan Taylor are the two big names, but there are plenty of other names. J.K. Dobbins, just off the top of my head, I think A.J. Dillon's this season as well. And most of those guys aren't going to go in the first round. So if all of them are going to go in day 2, as great as Clyde is, his build isn't quite built towards instant NFL success the same way some of theirs is. And because of that, his comp is more towards a Darren Sproles type. Not that that can't work. I think it will work. I think he will find success in the NFL. But because of that, his stock isn't very high. I see him more as a day 3 guy, or at least GMs, my guess is, see him more as a day 3 guy, unfortunately. Probably going in the mid to late 4th if I had to guess. I personally, if I were GM, obviously I don't know. This is just my own 2 cents. I would take the risk on him a bit earlier than probably most GMs will, but my guess is he's probably going to be a day 3 pick. As fits go, I think he can function anywhere. Running backs, obviously some teams can take advantage of him better than others, but running backs aren't super structured depending on where they go. In a running back of his type, he's a third down back, and any down back, great receiving back. That kind of guy, he can go anywhere, he's going to have success. So moving on to one of the top 2 targets for Joe Burrow this season on the offense, one of his top wide receivers, Justin Jefferson. Again, another LSU player with a great combine. Specifically, one number I'll talk about in just a second. But of course, he was one of the top 2 targets. Both he and Jamar Chase caught at least 18 touchdowns, which is an absurd number. Jamar Chase, of course, won the Blitnikoff, but he's a sophomore. He cannot declare. He probably will not next year. Justin Jefferson is, of course, declaring this year, and he is in the draft. And this is an unfortunate year for wide receivers, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But he was originally seen as a more early to mid day 2 guy before the combine. But then the combine happened, and the big thing that people were criticizing Justin Jefferson for, he had some of the best hands in the entire wide receiver class this year, and he had great route running ability. He was super reliable, and could play pretty much anywhere. He was a decent outside guy, more of a slot guy in general, and in that sort of player, he had a lot of success. But the big thing people were getting on him for was his speed. He wasn't a burn you type of wide receiver, and in this class there are plenty of those guys, the Jalen Reagors, the KJ Hamlers of the world, the Henry Ruggs, of course. And he isn't that guy. And a lot of people thought he was going to be very slow and thought it was more scheming play calling that Joe Brady did that got him open and found a lot of success, of course, along with his reliability. And he proved those people completely wrong. He ran a 4.43 40-yard dash at the Combine, which is absolutely incredible. And that was, I think, tied for 8th best among wide receivers, which is amazing. That's not top-tier speed. It's not that Rager, Hamler, Ruggs speed, but it's the next tier of absolutely great speed, more than enough to carry you into the next level, more than enough to have success at that point. And I think he will have plenty of that kind of success. Now he's firmly found himself into that second tier of wide receivers, alongside the likes of Henry Ruggs. Is more like, if you're tiering the wide receivers, of course you have CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy at the top, and then you have Henry Ruggs kind of in that tier 1.5, if you want to say. He's in that second tier if you want to count Henry Ruggs, Laviska Shenault, T. Higgins, Jalen Reagor, maybe someone like KJ Hamler. Into that mid, they have the talent of a mid to late first round pick. But because of just how stacked this wide receiver class, is, they'll probably find themselves, at least some of them will find themselves in the second round. It's such a stacked wide receiver class that despite all their success, they will not all be first round picks. And I think that is exactly where Justin Jefferson is going to end up being. He's a late first round pick. My guess is maybe early second. I think the best fits for him schematically, and I think this is the biggest player when it comes to scheme fits to talk about, because some teams need a deep threat wide receiver. They need a Henry Ruggs. They need a Jalen Reagor. Some teams need a bigger wide receiver, a Claiborne from Notre Dame, a T. Higgins. Maybe a team is going to prefer Laviska Shenault type, the more Swiss Army knife kind of player. Different teams are going to need different players, and a lot of those teams don't need Justin Jefferson's type of... a lot of the teams that are wide receiver needy that might get a guy in the late first round, I don't think Justin Jefferson fits perfectly in a lot of those teams, which is unfortunate for him. So the 49ers, I think, is one of those teams. They can get him at 30. I think he's a decent Emmanuel Sanders comp, Emmanuel Sanders replacement in a few years. But they just made a trade at 13, trading DeForest Buckner for that 13th overall pick. And I think they're more likely to go get Henry Ruggs at 13. That's my projection. If they don't end up getting him there, yes, a Justin Jefferson type might be the guy they go get at 30 if he's there. I could see that definitely being the case. But right now, I think it's a little bit more likely that they go get someone else like a Henry Ruggs. Then some people, of course, I'm a big Packers fan. A lot of people are saying he should go to the Packers. I'm not one of those people, despite being both a Tigers and a Packers fan. He feels, in my eyes, a little bit too similar in style to Devontae Adams. Devontae Adams, also super reliable. Devontae Adams, that number one wide receiver for Green Bay. Also, he's fast, of course, but a catch guy, a route running guy, reliability. I think you want more of an athlete as your number two wide receiver if you're Green Bay. You want a T. Higgins if he falls to you. You want a Laviska Shenault if he falls to you. And I don't think either of them fall to him. I think Green Bay ends up going somewhere else with that 30th overall pick. Excuse me, the 49ers have the 31st overall pick. I think the Patriots have a similar situation, similar problem with picking Justin Jefferson that Green Bay does. They are also in the range of potentially wanting to get him. But I think they also want someone different, like a T. Higgins, like a Laviska Shenault, whoever, like a Denzel Mims, because Julian Edelman is also that sort of wide receiver that isn't super athletically imposing, but is reliable and is great not just in the slot, but pretty much wherever you put him. I think Justin Jefferson is too similar in type of wide receiver for them to pick Justin Jefferson with that pick. They also just picked a wide receiver last season in the first round with N'Keal Harry. So we don't quite know yet. Then you have the Saints, who would have been in those talks, but they got Emmanuel Sanders, who again is a lot, in my eyes, very similar to Justin Jefferson. Then you have the Eagles, who I think is one of those teams that potentially could get him. Unlike the Packers or the Patriots or the Saints or the 49ers, who all had number one wide receivers last year and then just didn't have a core with them. The Eagles just didn't have a wide receiver. Nelson Aguilar got injured. Deshaun Jackson got injured. Everyone got injured. And Alshon Jeffrey got injured. So they're throwing out rookies like J.J. Arcega-Whiteside and the like, and it didn't have a lot of success for them, of course, despite making playoffs in the weakest division in football last year. So because of that, there is no real comp issue in that way, unlike the Packers and the Patriots. However, we saw in one game last year before Deshaun Jackson got injured just how much success a deep threat can be with Carson Wentz. I think they're more likely, with that pick, to go get someone like a Jalen Reagor or a KJ Hamler, a more speedster deep threat, Brandon Ayuk, within the same vein, to be that big receiver for the Philadelphia Eagles. I think that's more likely. I think Justin Jefferson is a better wide receiver than them, but I think they're a better scheme fit for the Eagles. And then finally, I think the wide receiver, I think the team who's the best scheme fit for Jefferson is the Tennessee Titans. I think he can fit very well there. They don't have as much of a wide receiver issue, but I think the more weapons they give Ryan Tannehill, the better he's off. And of course, they already have a decent number 2 wide receiver in Corey Davis. A.J. Brown was great as a number 1 last season, but I think he can fit great as a slot receiver, that number 3 to Brown and Davis, and go anywhere he needs to within that offense, and I think he can have a lot of success. The problem with that pick is I think Tennessee has too many needs. They picked A.J. Brown pretty early on last season, so spending in more draft capital on a wide receiver seems like a bad idea for them. I think they end up going somewhere else, like defensive back or linebacker or potentially offensive line. We'll have to see. So ultimately, unfortunately, I think he's more likely to go day 2, whereas I think he's definitely a day 1 talent. So moving on to Caleb Von Chassel, this is a guy the reverse is true. A lot of people see him as a day 1 talent. I don't see him necessarily as that. He's another guy with a great combine, a monster combine score, I think 6.88. And because of that, people are saying he should go even as high as the middle of the first round, and like as high as a 17-ish, 18th pick. I am not one of those people. I am not someone that thinks that he needs to be going that high. That's partially because of his position. He's an outside linebacker, and I think inside linebackers in this draft are a lot more valuable. I think he's a great player, but I see him more as an early day 2 guy in my eyes. Moving on to the 3 offensive linemen that either declared or were seniors this past year with LSU, and were a large reason why they won the award for the best offensive line in college football last year. Sadiq Charles, Damian Lewis, and Lloyd Cushenberry, all amazing players. They're all great, but they're not the top tier of offensive linemen, unfortunately, this class. The offensive line is another one of those position groups, especially offensive tackle, that is so stacked that when you're a solid player like these 3 are, they're not going to go in the first round. Those are your Tristan Wirfs, your Jedrick Wills, your Andrew Thomases of the world in that top tier, and then even lower down like Austin Jackson and Josh Jones and Tyler Biadasz. Those are the players that are already going in the first round. That's a lot of players already. That's about a fifth of the first round in themselves. At least 6, if not more, offensive linemen are going to go in that first round. So because of that, they're more of day 2 guys. Unfortunately, again, another set of those players that are solid, strong, big reason why LSU had so much success last season, but they're not day 1 guys in this draft because this draft as a whole is so good in so many places. Moving on to Brant Delpit. He's one of my personal favorite players from this past LSU team. Great cover guy. You can stick him on anywhere, on anyone you want. That big tight end monster that your team can't cover, you can put Brant Delpit on that sort of person. I think he's very valuable in that way. And another solid combine from him means that he's a real chance to go late round 1, which is where I see him going probably at the earliest. I don't see him going earlier than really like 28, 29, but I think that is where he's going to end up going. The Titans, I think, are very likely to get him. I think they're more likely to get him than Justin Jefferson, as an example. I think the 49ers are also very likely to get him. My guess right now, if I were a betting man, and this might not reflect the mock draft that I will end up releasing the week before the draft actually happens. My guess right now is those two teams both go safety. They're the first two teams to go safety, and they take the top two safeties off the board. Grant Delpit and Xavier McKinney. Delpit won the Thorpe Award, but McKinney had a little bit more solid across the board body of work threat last season, largely because Delpit was injured. So I think, depending on the scheme for those two teams, I don't know which one's going to go with which. The Titans, of course, have their choice if that does end up being what those two teams do. My guess is right now both those players will go in that 29-31 slots as of right now with that first round. I think that's where I see him going. I think those are the teams that fit the best for him. So moving on to a pair of linebackers. A little bit different of a situation from Caleb Von Chasson, not quite the same talent level of Chasson. Michael Divinity and Jacoby Phillips. I see them more as late day 2, early day 3 type guys, but their position group, and when you get that low in the draft, their position group being linebackers helps them a lot, because linebackers are very versatile just in their body type. And because of that, you can stick them anywhere. They can be special teams guys early on in their careers, things like that. And between that and, of course, the national championship, having the extra exposure of being on a national championship team, I think that's going to help them both out a lot. And they were both, of course, great last season. Great role players. Great players in that great LSU defense, especially in their front seven. So I think both of them are going to have success. They're more late day 2, early day 3 type of guys, but I think they will be solid and have good careers in the NFL. Moving on to long snapper Blake Ferguson. He got invited to the Combine, which is something I did not realize until recently. First off, good for him. And second off, I did not realize that they get drafted, do they? I'm not sure. But either way, I think he'll find a way in the NFL roster, and I hope he does. Moving on to Christian Fulton. Another one of those players that will end up going in the first round. I think he's probably the second most likely LSU Tiger to go in the first round, of course, behind Joe Burrow. Does that mean he's the second best LSU player in this draft class? Not necessarily, but I think just the way that the NFL draft works, I think he is the next most likely to end going in that first round. And I think he will go in the first round, almost definitely. He's the second or third best cornerback in the class. People rate him very closely with Trevon Diggs from Alabama, of course. And I think it's just team choice, team variant on which teams are going to choose which player. I think they both will end up going into that mid to late first round, that early to mid 20s or so. The team I've been mocking him to recently is the New Orleans Saints. I think they're in desperate need of cornerback help, especially after the Emmanuel Sanders deal. A much more need for cornerback help than wide receiver help, like a lot of people were wanting them to go with that first-round pick. And that first-round pick is much more important for the Saints this season because of their lack of second-round pick. They have to make that pick count. And the point is Christian Fulton that guy? I think that is the best. I think not only that, I think that's the best-case scenario for the Saints. I think if he falls to New Orleans, or Trevon Diggs if the other one gets picked, I think if he falls to New Orleans, then that is 100% no questions asked the pick. I think he has the talent not to be that mid to late first round pick. I think he's worth that 24th overall pick, and I think he would fit very well with New Orleans being that number 2 cornerback on opposing sides with Marshawn Lattimore. I do not see him going later than 24 because I don't see the Saints passing him up unless for some reason both he and Trevon Diggs fall. If they pick Trevon Diggs instead, I could see that. But I think my guess is Trevon Diggs gets picked in the 21-ish range, and he'll get picked at 24th. That's where I see him, and I think he fits very well with New Orleans right now. Moving on to Rashard Lawrence, the only defensive lineman, which kind of surprised me. They got invited to the Combine, and whilst this defensive line class isn't quite what it was last year the defensive line class was legendary, similar to this offensive line and wide receiver class this year. Names, Dexter Lawrence, Cleveland Farrell, Nick Bosa, of course, we just saw him win Defensive Rookie of the Year. Many, many great names. Josh Allen, just off the top of my head. I mean, amazing names from last year's defensive line class. It's not quite that, but it's still great. Chase Young, Javon Kinlaw, AJ Espinoza, Derek Brown. Of course, we saw him play amazingly at Auburn when they played us. Auburn really the only team that was able to slow down LSU's offense in any way throughout last season, and Derek Brown was a large reason for that. Because of that great defensive line class, especially at the top, I don't see Rashad Lawrence going in that first round. I think he's a borderline talent, but I think he's going to end up going in the middle of day 2 of that late second, early third round, if I had to guess. I think he's great. I think he's amazing, but I don't think he's quite there in that first round of the NFL draft. I think he's more of maybe even a third round talent. Moving on to Thaddeus Moss. Thaddeus Moss is one of the weirdest players to try to rate in this entire draft class. Not just with LSU, the entire draft class. Because what position do you put him at? He played tight end last year, but he was really more of just a tall wide receiver in that position. He was our number 4 wide receiver behind, of course, Terrace Marshall, Justin Jefferson, and Jamar Chase. But I don't see him. It's really weird to figure out exactly not just what position he's going to end up playing in the NFL, but also where he's going to end up going. I think his name recognition, of course, being related to Randy Moss, but B, his success with LSU this past season. I think those two things are going to raise his stock up a bit, but ultimately I see him more as like a third round type of guy, just because I don't really know where on the field you put him. You can get away with playing him at tight end last season with LSU. In college you can do that, but in the NFL I don't know if it's that simple. He either needs to put on a little bit of weight and play true tight end and be able to block, or he needs to slim down a bit and be a monster, really tall wide receiver. He can't play this sort of hybrid stuff that he was doing this past year. He was great in that role with LSU, but I don't think he can do that in the NFL. Of course, we'll have to see. He could end up proving me wrong, and I think he'll have a lot of success no matter what ends up happening. But I think it's a little up in the air as to what exactly does end up happening with Thaddeus Moss. And finally, I think it's kind of hard to say this is the most important part, but the name that I have probably the most unpopular opinion with in this LSU draft class, Patrick Queen. There is no true consensus opinion with Patrick Queen. He's probably the single player that has been varying the most throughout this draft class, not just with LSU, but in general, outside of a couple of quarterbacks, where he gets mocked from as early as the middle of the first round to as late as the second or third round. I mean, it's a monster difference in where people think he's going to get picked. I've seen mocks pick him as high as like 14, 15, 16, 17. And to me, I don't see it. I, again, love the guy. I think he, was a great contributor to LSU and that defense last season, but I just don't see him as a first-round guy. He had a terrible combine. A 5.8 is not a good rating. And he just... that number alone screams to me not a first-round talent at all. That's a role player at best. That combine number suggests he's, a day 3 prospect. Even I don't think he's going to go that late, and I don't think he should. I think he's more of a mid to late second round type of guy. But there are a lot of concerns with Patrick Queen. He wasn't a huge star with that LSU defense, and to be fair, not many people were. But between his production, between that combine number, I don't see him as a first-round talent. He'll be fine. He'll have success, but I hope for his sake, and of course the team that picks him, that he isn't picked as a first-round talent, because that's significant draft capital, especially if you're picking him into that mid to late teens, like a lot of people are saying that he will. And I think that's a lot of draft capital to spend on him, and I don't think that he's worth it. I think he's more of a mid to late second-round guy, and I think that's where he should be picked. Will he be picked there? Probably not. He'll probably be overdrafted. But I hope for his sake and for this team and hope for their success that is not what ends up happening, and that he ends up being picked where he needs to be and he can have that sort of success. I think he will definitely have success in the NFL. but I just don't think I have my doubts as to him having a huge amount of success. First round level of success. I don't see him as that sort of guy. I hope he does. Obviously, I hope he has as much success as he possibly can, but I have my own doubts. On that, I guess, relative downer, that is the last prospect to talk about. But I think as a whole, even if there are some guys that I think are a bit overrated in this NFL draft, I hope they have as much success as they can. I hope they go find great careers in the NFL. And also, I think they will find great careers in the NFL. I think this coaching staff from this past season with LSU was legendary, honestly, and one of the best you will ever see from a coaching staff. Joe Brady just found himself an offensive coordinator job in the NFL 1 year after being an assistant coach in college. That is a crazy leap up, and he completely deserves it. But not only that, the entire staff was great, and I think they've prepared him very well for not just him, but the entire NFL, the entire LSU draft class for having huge success this season and with their entire careers in the NFL. I hope they do have that I've said it a lot now, but success, and I wish them the best of luck in their future, of course, leaving LSU this year. So with that, I will see you guys next time. Hope you enjoyed. We'll talk more NFL and mock draft stuff next week. Don't know exactly what the plan is, but it will be NFL draft related in some way, shape, or form. But I will see you then. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next week. Same time, same channel.